very good afternoon to one and all present in this webinar. It's indeed my great pleasure to introduce our speaker of this session, Dr. Jayaganthan, Professor in the Department of Engineering Design, IIT Madras. Dr. Jayaganthan received his PhD from IISc Bangalore. He has published around 214 international refereed journals and 46 conference papers to his credit. His H index is 33 and he has got a total citation of 3,907. His research areas are additive manufacturing, SPD processing, fatigue and fracture of fracture mechanics, structure, property correlation, structural nanomaterials, finite element method and simulation. It's indeed a great pleasure to have you amongst us for this session, sir. I welcome you on behalf of the organizers and the institute. Now the session is over to Dr. Jayaganthan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your nice introduction. Very good afternoon to all of you, all the participants and the organizer. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Jayakumar and Dr. Arokya for their invitation to present my talk in this ACT-sponsored workshop. Today, I'm going to discuss corrosion behavior of additively manufactured nickel-based superalloys. You have already listened to series of lectures on additive manufacturing. Before I begin, let us recap what was covered in the last 3 days. Let us keep this session as very interactive. I would like to ask few questions before I move further. Having listened to series of lectures on additive manufacturing, my first question: what is so unique about additive manufacturing compared to other manufacturing routes? Just one line answer. In fact, it was there in the past also. Even in 80s, 90s, it was known as rapid prototyping or smart manufacturing and so on. Now there is so much of hype about additive manufacturing. In fact, it is going to be multi-billion-dollar industry in the coming years. And another thing I would like to focus, and I would like to inform all our teachers working in various colleges, for India, if it has to survey in the long run, we have to be very good at core sector. I'm referring to mechanical, civil, and electrical. Service sector is basically a supportive sector. For service sector to survive, we need to thrive in manufacturing sector. That's where India is now currently emphasizing Atmanirbhar. We have to become self-reliant. For that, we all should contribute for the growth of manufacturing industry in India. That's where additive manufacturing is going to play a very crucial role for the growth of manufacturing sector in India. That's why I'm asking this question: what is so unique about additive manufacturing? Let us say you are teaching to first year or second year students of mechanical engineering. Of course, you listen to all the definition, layer by layer deposition, product quality is good, and so on. What should be one line answer about what is so unique about additive manufacturing? Compared to conventional manufacturing, you have casting route, followed by you do a lot of processing like rolling, forging, extrusion, and depending upon the final product you want to produce, you go after all this thermomechanical processing. And finally, you will do sort of machining, milling, and things like that before you start producing the final component. What is so unique about additive manufacturing compared to conventional manufacturing? So the uniqueness of additive manufacturing is basically we are directly producing the final component, and it requires bare minimum post-processing. You put the raw material, you are directly getting the final product. That is the one-line answer. You are directly producing the final component, not material. In the conventional route, you begin with the casting, followed by various stages covering rolling, forging, extrusion, wire drawing, depending upon the kind of products you want to produce actually. At the end, you require a lot of machining operations. In the additive manufacturing, one single line answer, of course, you know detailed technical definition. The simple answer, you are directly producing the final component, and it can be directly put into function in the actual service conditions. Of course, it requires bare minimum post-processing, like heat treatment, shot cleaning, and some component you may require a little bit of machining also. So the uniqueness is basically we are producing directly the final component as per your record geometry and things like. The next question comes, you know about definition. Why don't you use the whole powder at one go? Why we need to go for a layer by layer deposition? I want to answer these questions, 3 set of questions, then I will move further actually. I will connect what is the advantage you will have when you use additive manufacturing, typically for nickel-based superalloy. I will convince you why we should go for additive for superalloy. The superalloys, they are used extensively for high temperature application. For example, in gas turbine, aircraft engine, we use extensively in engine components for high temperature applications. It provides very good mechanical properties at high temperature, as well as it provides very good corrosion resistance actually. Right now we use conventional route. That's where I'm going to convince you what is the major advantage you are going to have if you try to choose 3D printing for superalloy to produce components of engines. Typically, as I said, gas turbine and aero engines actually. You already listened to series of lectures like laser based, E-beam based. Why don't you use the bulk powder at one go instead of layer by layer? In fact, among the different additive routes, each one we need to see what is the typical deposition rate. Here directly we are printing the final component, it's all right, but we need to know what type of components we can produce. Is it possible to produce large sized parts actually? That's where you need to know about what is the limitation of additive. Why we need to go for layer by layer instead of taking the bulk powder at one go. A laser based or E-beam based technique, we deposit layer by layer. Why don't we take the powder at one go? Why we should go for layer by layer? So that's where among different deposit route, we are comparing their deposit rate. At what rate, what is the volume of the material we can print actually?
So by layer by layer, we can control the mechanical property or porosity like properties. Right? If it is fully, if we get right, we can't control the inner portion of the material. Layer by layer, we can control right? Quality and everything.
Yeah. Any other answer, please? You are right. So our objective is basically, we need to precisely control the microstructure what you obtain. If I take the whole powder at one go, I need to know the laser power penetration depth. It is limited by the laser power penetration depth. If I take bulk powder at one go, all the powder cannot be melted at one go actually. So having taken very thin layer of powder, when I apply the laser, it can penetrate deep. The whole bulk volume of the material will undergo melting at one go. As you rightly said, I need to have precise control of microstructure produced when you do layer by layer deposition. In other words, it is possible to achieve fine-grained structure or epoxide microstructure when you use the 3D printing. It may be laser-based or E-beam based actually. We want to have precise control of microstructure. The next question comes, why laser or E-beam instead of conventional heating actually? The reason being, laser beam is basically coherent beam. Penetration depth is quite high. If you choose conventional heating, surface will heat fast compared to the interior part actually. The coherent beam, it can penetrate deeper actually. When it penetrates deeper at the given point, the whole bulk volume of the metal undergoes melting. That means melting and solidification, it takes place quite fast actually. In other words, in additive manufacturing, we are exploiting the uniqueness of laser power, coherent beam, their penetration depth, the whole bulk volume of the material undergoes melting, and then it undergoes sudden cooling. So we are playing with solidification conditions to provide desirable cooling rate, very high cooling rate actually. So that's how we are able to achieve fine grain structure. Either you take laser beam or E-beam, their penetration depth is quite high. There is nothing like differential heating at the surface compared to the interior. That's where we go for choosing laser or E-beam actually, for metallic material as well as for even ceramic materials actually. So when it comes to polymer, we choose UV light actually, stereolithography actually. So I don't want to go to the definition of additive manufacturing. It's already known to you, layer by layer deposition. You give the input file from your computer. That file we call STL file. The printer understands that. Depending upon the common geometry you want to produce, a CAD file gives that instruction. Layer by layer deposition. In the additive manufacturing routes, we have E-beam, laser-based beam. Your starting material could be powder or it could be wire. Okay, depending upon that, you choose either laser or E-beam. And as I said, of course, it's layer by layer deposition of powder. And if it happens to be wire, we call wire or additive manufacturing. So the typical advantage of additive manufacturing, that's where here I'm trying to highlight with respect to nickel-based superalloy. As I said, the nickel-based superalloys are used for aircraft engine, gas turbine, for high temperature applications in order to make a blade, disc, and other lot of spare parts in the aero engine actually. So that's where in aero engine, if you see, as I said, superalloys are used to the extent of more than 50% actually in the engine component. The conventional route, if you try to make use of the material, that's where I am trying to highlight unique advantage of using additive route. Here I try to introduce the term called buy-to-flay ratio. Buy-to-flay ratio is very high for conventional route. Let us say you want to produce compressor disc having complex geometry. When I say buy-to-flay ratio, the amount of raw material you procure and how much it is getting transformed to the useful product. Since it involves various stages of casting, in between a lot of other processing, you are going to waste more than 60% of raw material. That's why it's called buy-to-flay ratio. Buy is nothing but the amount of material procured, and flay means what is that amount of material is translating into the actual product actually. So typically for Euro engine component, I want to highlight already Airbus, GE, already they are producing smaller sized parts for Euro engine. They are in use actually. So this buy-to-flay ratio is of the order of 2 for the additively manufactured part. It means that we are drastically reducing the amount of material wasted actually. The conventional route, a lot of material is getting wasted in the form of chips actually. It requires a lot of milling operations, right from the raw material to the product. Since it involves various stages of processing, during the various stages of processing, we need to, it's called subtractive manufacturing. You are going to waste a lot of material. So with respect to nickel-based superalloy, I am trying to highlight unique advantage of using additive route. It could be laser-based or E-beam based. I am trying to introduce the term called buy-to-flay ratio. What is the amount of material is getting translated into useful product? It's quite high in additive. Because we are directly using the powder, we are getting the final component. There's nothing like milling, machining. You are not wasting a lot of materials actually. So the buy-to-flay ratio is quite low for additively prepared parts compared to conventional route actually. So we are trying to highlight the amount of material wasted when you want to make complex geometry of the component used in Euro engine. The conventional route, the loss is quite high. That's where they are trying to adopt, or already they are adopting 3D printing route to produce the disc plates typically for engine components in Euro applications actually. Apart from that, when you see from the supply chain perspective, there are a lot of parts we call OEM. They are all produced in different places. From supply chain perspective, it's quite complex in conventional route actually. In additive, it's direct. In fact, directly we can deploy the facility in the place where you want to produce the component actually. In supply chain perspective, it's quite simple in additively prepared sample compared to conventional routes actually. So this slide is visible, Jayakumar, advantage of AM.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Hello.
Sir. Yes, sir,
Yeah.
it's visible.
So I just mentioned nickel-based superalloy. If you choose 3D printing, the bind to flareous is quite low. It means that you are not wasting a lot of material when you do 3D printing of complex geometry of the components used for Euro engine components. In addition to that, I'm just taking another example. The landing gear, in aircraft, landing gear actually. It is currently produced by using high pressure die casting. That's where the right side, if you see cost per assembly and production volume. So for landing gear, for production runs of less than 42, the 3D printing is quite advantageous actually, as compared to the other conventional route actually. And in addition to that, in the conventional technique, you can see the lot of labor, land, it involves series of steps and things like that. In 3D printing is quite simple. You can directly put this technique into the place where you want to produce the components. And the disadvantage of additive, as of now, small size parts are being made easily. And as of now, typically if you see the cost wise also, it has to come up, it has to mature. But the future projection 5 years down the line, right now they say it's expensive, it will become 50% cheaper as compared to what is being charged currently. And the typical deposition rate also, they are working extensively to make it faster. In fact, the projection 5 years down the line, they will become 400% faster than currently, how it produces the material or the parts actually. And of course, you are aware of the various techniques in additive manufacturing. You have binder jetting, direct energy deposition, material jetting, powder bed fusion, and sheet lamination. And we have this typical stereolithography for polymers. And also you have these wire arc additive manufacturing also. Typically for additive techniques for materials, I classify in terms of polymeric material and metals. If it is metal, we can choose the starting material, either powder or wire. In powder, of course, you are aware we use SLM. We call it a circular laser melting or circular laser sintering, or it's called a direct metal laser sintering. There are different variants of same laser-based technique, direct energy deposition and things like. And you can also use wire as a feed. Now, when you use these typical direct energy depositions, there are different names for it. DLD, we have E-beam, and wire arc additive manufacturing. So typically for metal, we have powder as a starting material, or wire could be as a starting material. So when it comes to polymer, they are classified into two types, thermoplastics and thermosets. So this slide is visible, Jayakumar. I'm moving to next slide. Hello.
Yes, sir, it's visible, sir.
Yeah. So coming to polymer, you have two different types, thermoplastic and thermosets. If it happens to be thermoplastics, we can have either powder as a starting material or a filament. That's where we have selective laser sintering, as well as other techniques you can see, fused filament fabrications. And thermoset, basically it's a, let us say for epoxy resin, we can go for using a vat polymerization. It's called material jetting. It's based on, you can use the technique like stereolithography or digital light processing actually. So you have to be aware of, depending upon material being metallic or polymer, what type of technique we can make use of to produce typically 3D printed parts. And here I want to highlight among various additive manufacturing techniques, the typical deposition rate, if you compare, typically for wire-based direct energy depositions, electron beam additive manufacturing, there we use wire as a feed. Typical deposition rate, you can see 11.34 kg per hour. Deposition rate for wire arc additive manufacturing, where we try to use a electron beam as a source actually. And extreme left, if you see the conventional selective laser melting or E-beam melting, by making use of powder, the typical deposition rate you can see only 0.1 to 0.2 kg per hour. But they are continuously improving. Now it's possible, even with the powder, it's possible to achieve deposition rate of the order of even 5 kg per hour. So this is very, very important to know that at what rate you can print the parts actually. And in between we have data energy depositions, and we have laser-based single wire data energy depositions. It goes to the order of 2.9 kg per hour. So let me recap once again. You know why we go for layer by layer, and you know the advantage of going for laser-based or EB-based technique, because we are directly producing the final part, and we are exploiting the unique characteristics of the laser beam or E-beam. Their penetration depth is quite high. That's how the whole bulk volume of material undergoes melting. The whole melted material undergoes cooling at one go. That's where we are ensuring to get the desired microstructure. Okay, so ultimately, you know, the property is decided by the microstructure. So coming to the structure of materials produced through additive route, let us take, for example, selective laser melting or selective laser sintering. And the typical cooling rate is of the order of greater than 10⁵ Kelvin per second. So you need to remember that the cooling rate is going to play a major role. In fact, in the conventional casting route, you see the surface could be highly eco-oxide. If you go deeper, you will get a lot of segregations, dendrites, and things like actually. So having very high cooling rate, basically we are ensuring the desired microstructure for the material. Ultimately, microstructure is the one which will dictate the properties actually. So that's where here I try to introduce the triangle. Processing, microstructure, and properties. All three are interrelated actually. Processing, for example, our additive route will influence microstructure. Microstructure will influence properties. In fact, if you ask me why do you have several variants of same laser-based technique, it is not like one size fit for all. Each technique has got its own pros and cons actually. Depending upon your application requirement, depending upon material you're handling, you have to go for one of the variants of laser-based or E-beam. E-beam additive manufacturing is quite good for ceramic material, as well as the metallic material if it happens to be high melting material. Even for example, superalloy, we can exploit E-beam-based additive manufacturing to produce final parts. So here we are trying to highlight in this slide the typical cooling rate is quite high for circular laser melting, and the direct laser deposition typical cooling rate is of the order of 10⁵ to 10⁵ Kelvin per second. And the traditional casting route, please see here, in the traditional casting route, the typical cooling rate is only 273 to 373 Kelvin per second. So if you want to get well-defined microstructure, you need to impose very high cooling rate. Of course, you are aware when you do additive manufacturing through laser or E-beam, you might introduce a lot of residual stress, but that is taken care through proper optimization of the parameter, laser-based parameter and E-beam-based parameter, as well as we try to preheat the substrate on which you lay the powder one by one, layer by layer actually. So by preheating the substrate, okay, by playing with the proper process parameter, it is possible to take care of residual stress also. Because we are going to impose very huge temperature gradient that might lead to residual stress. In fact, the problem with the additive, you should also address dimensional distortion. You might be giving CAD file, STL file from the computer, but how precisely the intricate parts are being printed through additive, that's where, because of very high temperature gradient, will end up in getting dimensional distortion. That is because of very severe residual stress introduced to the sample during 3D printing. So what you want to highlight, typical cooling rate is quite high typically for additive route, and because of this local rapid heating and fast cooling, we end up in getting a very good refined microstructure. And of course, we have within the microstructure, it is possible to get the internal constants of the microstructure we call dislocation substructures, and as well as we can also exploit the typical compressive residual stress introduced into the material, typically to take care of fatigue loading when the components are used under dynamic loading conditions actually. And the extreme right to show you typical microstructure of metallic material produced through additive route. The slide colorful micrograph is taken from EBSD, electron basket diffraction, wherein we try to get a very good refined microstructure. Hope all of you are able to understand what I mean by microstructure. Microstructure is basically we are trying to highlight the constants of the microstructure we call it as the grain or crystal. The grain will have different morphological feature. Microstructure will have various constituents. It may be a single phase alloy or two phase alloy or multi-phase alloy, and it may be single phase, two phase or multi-phase alloy. And each phase we want to look at through microscopy. We want to know the typical microstructure, the constituents being grain, how small or how big the grains are. That's where we have different morphological feature. We have columnar grain. Columnar grain, typically they will be long grain, they will grow vertically. So depending upon solidification condition, cooling rate being high or low, you end up in getting various morphologies of your material. So macroscopically, you see the material to be continuum. If you go deeper, if you see through microscopy, we are looking at the internal structure, it's no more continuum. It is a heterogeneous microstructure having single phase or dual phase or multi-phase. And if you try to look at each phase, the typical internal structure, it's made up of several grains actually. In fact, you are aware, it's called polycrystalline material. Material, when it is melted, when it undergoes cooling, the cooled material will have polycrystalline microstructure, and each crystal, each grain, we need to look at their morphology. The morphology, as I said, there are various morphology. The first morphology is called columnar grain. In fact, if you choose E-beam melting, you end up in getting columnar grain. That columnar grain is the one we get. That's a typically column-like structure, thin rod-like structure. They will grow vertically. Okay, columnar grain, and then we have euco-oxide fine grain structure. That's where you see in the color graph at the bottom. When I say euco-oxide structure, very small fine grain, they will have the same dimension in all directions actually. Fine grain structure, they will have the same dimension in all directions actually. Well-defined grains, fine grains actually. And fine grains are essential to improve the strength and hardness of the material. In other words, when you do stress analysis of components at the macro level, we are only looking at macro level, the typical dimensional distortion. In fact, when you do static and dynamic analysis of any component, you give more focus, critical region where stress will build up more actually. Apart from looking at macroscopic dimensional distortion, when you do stress analysis, it is very essential to understand what causes that stress accumulation, particularly at the vulnerable region. In the vulnerable region, we have to zoom it up further, see what are the constituents, in other words, microstructure at the particular vulnerable region actually. So that's where it's very essential. You may be producing component, but as a design engineer, apart from looking at from the continuum perspective, I should also know what is the material used for producing the component, what it constitutes in terms of composition, in other words, in terms of their morphology. In two directions, this size is bigger compared to that direction actually. If it is euco-oxide structure, let us say 5 micron, introduced to columnar structure, yes please. Since I assume that most of them are with the mechanical, and also most of them, let us say they could be having interest in design. As a design engineer, I should have fair amount of knowledge in materials. It means that you should have fair amount of knowledge about microstructure also. That's where I'm trying to highlight what I mean by microstructure, because microstructure is the one which dictates the properties. That's where I'm trying to highlight as a mechanical person how I look at the microstructure as compared to metallurgy structure. For you, typically is a geometrical element. It could be 1D element, 2D element, 3D element. I already defined columnar structure, euco-oxide structure, and you have a cellular structure. Cellular structure could be like a pyramidal structure or a spherical structure. So when you do stress analysis, you should look at from the microstructural perspective also how that internal constant could play a role, how it is going to accumulate stress when the components are subjected to static and dynamic load over a longer period of time actually. In other words, what I want to highlight, for any material, you want to know the service life. You do stress analysis. At the critical region, you calculate stress. The moment stress reaches the critical concentration beyond the allowable stress, it's going to fail. Why the materials are failing? You can say that stress is getting amplified. But what causes the material failure? That's where you have to here remember the microstructure they are not stable anymore. Once you keep loading over the longer period of time, the microstructure will undergo transformation actually. Microstructure will undergo transformation. They are no more stable. At the beginning, when the components are put into use, you have thermally stable microstructure. Even when they are subject to the load, the microstructure is intact. I mean the internal constants being columnar or EQ oxide or cellular structure. All this starting structure, they are quite stable, okay, over the period of time. The moment stress starts accumulating, when you use it for longer period of time, the microstructure will undergo transformations. They are no more stable. In fact, having eukaryotic structure, depending upon the load they are subjected to, they may undergo elongation actually. I am trying to highlight the internal microstructure is being heterogeneous. They will undergo transformation. They are no more spherical. They are no more equi-oxide structure. The moment internal geometrical element keep changing as a function of time, when they are subjected to static or dynamic load, what will happen? Obviously, the stress concentration will tend to change compared to being spherical when it becomes a elongated grain, okay, or soft-like structure. Obviously, stress concentration will get amplified. I'm trying to highlight why the material fails when you use it for longer period of time. Of course, from the mechanics perspective, you can say that stress is getting amplified. Why stress is getting amplified? Because of microstructural transformation. Depending upon temperature, depending upon the load being static and dynamic, microstructure undergoes transformation. This is called phase transformations. It's no more stable. It's no more equi-oxide, no more columnar structure. Even fine-grained structure, it will have very good strength, fatigue-like. When you use it for longer period of time, they are no more fine-grained. They will grow in size actually. It is basically microstructural transformation when they are subjected to repeated loading, okay, load being static or dynamic, and as well as when you use the material for high temperature application, we need to account for thermal stability also. As a mechanical person, I need to see stability with respect to mechanical load and stability with respect to temperature. And as well as we should also see the internal composition of your typical microstructure, what it's made of. That's where corrosion comes into picture. Will it lead to sort of a electrochemical reaction between your component and the environment? So coming to the typical additive route, okay. So in additively prepared sample, you might have typical artifacts. For example, you can have unmelted powder or micro crack. And since you are using vacuum, wherein we try to use gas, inert gas, there could be entrapped gas pores also. And it will have some artifacts called balling if you don't ensure proper process parameter, and it might lead to rough surfaces actually. I am trying to highlight the typical artifacts what you get when you try to make use of selective laser melting. And the typical defects, obviously, it will influence your strength, percentage elongation, ductility, as well as fatigue properties, fracture toughness, and as well as when the components, when they are reacting with the environment, that's why it's called corrosion, electrochemical reaction between your material and the environment. And of course, when it undergoes typical load, static load or dynamic load, they would also lead to wear, rubbing between two components. They will undergo typical mechanical loss actually wear. So wear is due to typical physical loss, and corrosion is because of chemical reaction between material and the environment. And coming to nickel-based superalloy, in this talk I would like to highlight, as I said, nickel-based superalloys are used extensively to fabricate engine component. In fact, 50% of the engine component, they are made up of nickel-based superalloy, and exclusively among nickel-based superalloy, Inconel 700 is used extensively, and among various alloys, superalloy is used typically for high temperature applications. And typically, if you can see, so this slide is visible, Jaykumar, and extreme right, you can just see I am trying to focus superalloys for typical aircraft structure. I am trying to highlight a failure.
Yes, sir. Yes,
we
sir.
are using variety of materials for aircraft structure, and in material failure wise, where this superalloy stands actually. My presentation is focused on superalloy. I already highlighted superalloys are used to make not typical engine components. It could be disc or blade, okay, typically in the engine component. When you look at the various failures, okay, before that, we try to highlight superalloy. Typically, it accounts 22% of failure, and steel is the maximum 42%. And we are going to see how they fail. Here, I'm trying to highlight in the aircraft structure. Typically, in high temperature application, the superalloy accounts for 22% of failure actually. And typical failure, if you see for aircraft structures, and the fatigue constitutes 52% actually, and the corrosion constitutes 17%, and the 17% comes extensively from the superalloy used in high temperature application. But it is working in high aggressive environment. Obviously, we need to account for structural integrity in terms of fatigue. In the high temperature, they are prone for oxidation also. That is exposed to atmosphere, your component will react with the environment. It will lead to corrosion. So typically, corrosion accounts for 17% of failure. And of course, other failures are aberration, and due to other defects, it accounts for 66% actually. And again, this slide to highlight in aircraft structure, we have a wing structure, fuselage structure, landing gear. So we have a variety of parts in aircraft, and the typical corrosions, if you see the aircraft structures, of course, I'm focusing superalloys for typical engine. Apart from that, we have other failures: galvanic corrosion, exfoliation, pitting corrosions, atmospheric corrosion, a variety of corrosions actually. In fact, in corrosions, we have 8 different forms of corrosion. Depending upon the nature of attack, we classify corrosion into 8 different types. The first one is called uniform attack. Uniform means you tend to see the typical degradations over the entire surface of the component. That we call uniform attack. And the remaining type of corrosion that we call galvanic corrosion, crevice corrosion, fatigue corrosion, intergranular corrosion, erosion corrosion, stress corrosion, finally hydrogen embrittlement actually. You are aware of stress corrosion cracking. Okay, suppose if you have tensile stress in the component and the components are exposed to aggressive environment, the combined influence of tensile stress and the aggressive environment over a longer period of time, it will try to induce crack actually. Initiation, crack propagation, finally the component will fail actually. Stress corrosion cracking under static load. Even during fabrication of lot of structures or machineries, we mainly induce a lot of tensile stress. Unless otherwise they are relieved through post-processing treatment, the tensile stress will remain in your structure due to fabrication process actually. That stress we call static stress. Static stress in combination with the environment, it will lead to stress corrosion cracking. In fact, in the past, the typical boiler, the boiler simply exploded in the past actually. That is because of the steam containing chloride actually. Okay, the boiler components, it underwent a typical stress corrosion cracking. And if the load is being dynamic, we call corrosion fatigue actually. Typically, the superalloys used in high temperature application, they are subject to dynamic load. You should provide very good fatigue strength, and the fatigue strength is influenced by high temperature corrosion also. The fatigue life will deteriorate not only due to mechanical load, we need to account for high temperature oxidation also. Plus, we call, depending upon the environment, if it happens to be like salt lake environment, we call the degradation as hot corrosion actually. And this typical slide to show you in the engine component. In fact, I already mentioned we have 8 different types of corrosion, starting from galvanic, uniform attack, intergranular corrosion, erosion corrosion. All these corrosions, they are called localized attack. Only the first type, uniform attack, you can see the entire surface. All the remaining 7 different forms of corrosion, they are all called localized attack. In fact, here I use the term called pitting. Pitting basically leads to formation of tiny holes in our components actually. It is a localized attack, and how the superalloy leads to pitting attack we are going to see. I am trying to highlight what a typical corrosion failure in your component. In the engine component, the localized attack, it's called pitting, is very common actually. And why it leads to pitting attack, I'm going to discuss. Right now, please remember the pitting is nothing but localized attack actually. There are so many other forms of corrosion. Why this particular localized attack occurs, I'm going to explain actually. And here to highlight, since my talk is on corrosion behavior of additively manufactured superalloy, and the superalloy also, in fact, as I said, it is basically nickel-based superalloy It contains nickel is the major element. In addition to that, we have other alloying elements, chromium, iron. Apart from nickel is the major. I'm going to show the table also. We have chromium, iron, and a lot of other alloying elements. Why do you call super alloy? Because they provide very good strength, toughness, fatigue life, creep resistance, as well as corrosion resistance at high temperature. Their mechanical properties are better than other material. That's why they are called super alloys actually. So this slide basically to highlight why we need to study corrosion of nickel-based super alloy. Reason being, these alloys are used for high temperature application. Okay, typical service content is very aggressive. We need to ensure that typical structural integrity over a longer period of time. In fact, engine life is typically of the order of 10 years actually. We cannot use it more than that. Reason being, they work in aggressive environment. The maintenance cost is quite high. The maintenance due to corrosion is almost of the order of more than 15% actually. As compared to maintenance due to other factors, the corrosion alone constitutes 10% of the overall cost actually. So that's where it's very significant. We need to have material with very good corrosion resistance actually. And coming to this typical nickel-based super alloy, I am trying to highlight about this 718. So the uniqueness of this particular alloy, in fact, the extreme right, you can see that composition. The major element is nickel, around more than 55% is nickel, and we have chromium ion and a lot of alloying elements, aluminum, titanium, copper, phosphorus, boron. So why do you have so many alloying elements? The alloying element composition also quite critical. They are going to contribute for providing strengthening to the material. You are making component using material, and the material should be able to provide the required properties, mechanical properties, because we are talking about for a material which can take load. Okay, it may be under static load or dynamic load. We need to ensure that good mechanical properties. We choose alloying element in such way that to provide very good mechanical strength as well as corrosion resistance also. The uniqueness of Inconel 718, they provide very good creep and rupture strength and very high resistance to fatigue. Okay, so the high temperature properties in terms of fatigue and creep properties quite good. What is creep? Creep is basically time dependent deformation at high temperature actually. They will not undergo plastic deformation at high temperature. That you call creep, and fatigue is quite good. And these 718, they are used typically for disc and blade and casing for the high pressure section of the compressor, and as well as for some blade component for turbine engine. And even in rocket engine and cryogenic environment, we use this nickel-based super alloy, where they provide very good toughness, fracture toughness actually. So I already highlighted the 7 is used for 718 is used for high temperature application. It is important to know that what it constitutes in terms of alloying elements. And we already know they provide very good strength and creep property as well as oxidation resistance also. So I am trying to highlight about this Inconel 718. You can see the various alloying elements. I talked about microstructure. It may be single phase alloy or multi-phase alloy. In fact, I'm going to discuss the 718, what it constitutes actually. And before that, we are trying to highlight the role of various alloying elements. What is the role of chromium? They contribute for solid solution strengthening by forming carbide. You can see typical carbide formed using chromium. We want to have very good strength, fatigue property, creep resistance. You should know the role of all the alloying elements, at what proportion it should be added actually. So composition is critical, as well as what phase they tend to form. Their morphological features are also quite critical. I've talked about columnar grain, dendritic grain, eco-oxide grain. In fact, dendritic structure is not desirable. Tree-like structure actually. Typically, when you try to do stress analysis of the microstructure with the dendrite and eco-oxide, dendritic structure, they are not desirable. In dendritic structure, something called we have primary arm, secondary arm. They are all almost like needle-like structure. They will try to accumulate more stress when you do stress analysis actually. So here I'm trying to highlight the role of various alloying elements, starting from chromium, cobalt. They all contribute for strengthening. When I say strengthening, to have very good strength as a fatigue life for your material. And if you take typically molybdenum and tungsten, tend to form typical precipitate like M23/6 is carbide. We are going to see the typical Inconel 718. What are the phases we are having? each phase for what type of strengthening they contribute to actually. So this is the role of various alloying elements. And then the next slide, if you see, yeah. So when you see the microstructure of Inconel 718, now it's clear to you what property it provides. And I'm just looking at a typical microstructure of Inconel 718. If you see the microstructure, it contains a phase, gamma double prime, gamma prime, delta, and we have a M represents the typically metal, carbide, and then lava phase actually. In fact, when we use 3D printing, our role should be to ensure each phase should provide desired microstructure in terms of eco-oxide or cellular structure or lamellar structure, variety of microstructure with various morphology needs to be tuned. We have to tailor the morphology of all these phases. Inconel 718 to provide very good strength and even fatigue and creep and as well as corrosion resistance. You need to know what phase it constitutes, and each phase you can see how they are different from each other. Gamma, gamma prime, gamma double prime, delta. You see the corresponding crystal structure. You have to go from the fundamental building block. Fundamental building block, you start from crystal structure. You know variety of unit cell, body center cubic, face center cubic. So cells are arranging one above the other periodically. Okay, so that's what we call crystalline structure. We have a regular periodicity, fundamental building block. For example, our building structure, we have the brick structures. Structure is called a fundamental building block for the materials. We call unit cell, face center cubic structure, body center tetragonal for gamma. So I'm trying to highlight when you see the microstructure of Inconel 718. Yeah, we have various phases: gamma phase, gamma prime, gamma double prime. In fact, as I said, our role when you do 3D printing, we need to take care of the morphology of all these phases. When I say morphology, typical size and shape of all these phases. How small that particular grain in each phase actually. As I said, crystal structure is quite important. Crystal structure is also be designed. Typically, if you know about a slip system, for example, ceramics, we say they are and metal material, they are ductile. How do you explain being ductile or brittle? For that, fundamentally, I should know what is the crystal structure you have for the material. Crystal structure fundamentally will decide the kind of slip system you are going to have, and in return, the slip system is going to decide material will turn to deform plastically or they will fail like ceramic material, brittle mode actually. So that's where the crystal structure is quite important actually. In fact, we say typical strength, high temperature strength is quite good for superalloy. That's where we need to look at typical phase, their morphology as well as the crystal structure actually. And gamma phase is basically FCC. As I said, Inconel 718 contains predominantly nickel. Gamma phase, typically the matrix is called nickel, FCC. And if it is gamma double prime, it is basically precipitate peak actually, Na3 niobium. And then we have gamma prime. Again, we can see the role of various alloying elements. In fact, we already seen the role of different alloying elements actually. And each phase, you can see the crystal structure, typical chemical composition actually. And if you see the carbide, you have niobium, titanium, they tend to form carbide, mixed carbide. In fact, this carbide, they contribute to provide strength at the high temperature. In fact, we need to look at this gamma prime, gamma double prime, and delta, where they sit in the microstructure. Are they being uniformly distributed in the microstructure? Are they found predominantly the grain boundaries? In addition to knowing their size and shape of all the precipitate gamma prime, gamma double prime, delta, and metal carbide, we need to look at all these precipitates, their size and shape. In addition to that, where they are found in the microstructure. Are they found at the grain boundaries? Are they being distributed uniformly throughout the matrix? So ultimately, you fabricate the material through additive, and afterwards it might require heat treatment or it might require short cleaning. So when you do post-processing, the material or component will undergo microstructural transformation, and as a result, our aim is to ensure that having subjected to post-processing, I end up in getting desired microstructure of all these precipitates actually. In fact, if you want to improve the properties, we need to tailor the typical morphology of all these phases. The gamma is the matrix phase. All remaining gamma prime, gamma double prime, delta, metal carbide, lava phase, they are all minor precipitate peak actually. Precipitates actually. So these precipitates need to be controlled precisely. If you want to ensure you are achieving very good strength, fatigue property, creep property, as well as corrosion resistance also. Yeah. And here this slide again to get having known the typical phases in the Inconel 7 and 8, the extreme right you see, as I said, we have gamma, gamma prime, gamma double prime, and so on. And you can see typical crystal structure is being different between gamma and gamma prime. The extreme right at the top bottom, if you see, you tend to see typical raft structure actually, gamma, gamma prime, typical wall-like structure. So to explain why it could provide very good strength at high temperature, for that I am looking at interface between gamma and gamma prime. Typically they tend to form misfit. In fact, that's where we call when you try to look at two different phases, the interface could be matching 1-to-1, or if at all if there is mismatch, the mismatch is taken care of by having dislocation. Hope you are aware of dislocation. The material we call dislocation, nothing but line defect actually. So the interface we are looking at between two different phases, and gamma prime, they turn to form typical structure. You can see wall-like structure. It's called raft-like structure. The raft-like structure is contributing to slow down the movement of dislocation in the material. They contribute for providing good strength at high temperature actually. So that's why crystal structure, their morphology also important to know that what kind of interface you are having between two phases actually. And the kind of mismatch you have between two different phases, that is decided by your crystal structure. If you have one-to-one match, misfit could be smaller. And if there is large mismatch because of different crystal structure, and the interface is going to undergo a lot of strain, we call that is strain, misfit strain. So once the strain accumulation is more, the intent will influence the property of the material actually. Between two different phases to ensure that at high temperature, they are able to provide very good strength. In fact, if you look at the extreme right raft-like structure, basically tries to slow down the movement of dislocation. Here, dislocation, I call it as a line defect in the material in order to explain the strength of material. In other words, when you do forming of, okay, what fundamentally drives this deformation? That is because of movement of dislocation. I call creep strength is quite good. Why it's so good? The way they have typically gamma small misfit prevents the faster movement of dislocation. So that's what. So this movement they are related. And here typically to show you when you try to add alloying element, typically niobium is one of the very important, crucial alloying element. When you add niobium to the typical encoder 7 and 8, you end up in forming different phases depending upon the compounds of niobium you tend to add, and as well with respect to temperature. So the typical, if you make use of encoder 7 and 8 to 3D printing like laser based or E-beam, so ultimately you need to play with typical cooling rate also. Our objective is finally to end up in getting very good microstructure. Typically, all this additive route, it comes under non-equilibrium cooling. We do certain cooling actually. This is called non-equilibrium cooling. Basically, we end up in getting fine cellular structure. Typical structure is grain size of order of 500 nanometer. And as well as we have other phases. We already discussed encoder 7 and 8, what kind of phase it contains. It contains gamma phase, lava phase. The lava phase is basically intermetallic compound. They are not desirable, but of course we have to play with their morphology to ensure that they are not detrimental to the properties actually. On the extreme right, you see when you do certain laser melting, typical microstructure, what you see at the extreme top as well as at the bottom. At the bottom structure, you can see typical white spots. They typically correspond to cellular structure for your gamma phase, the encoder 7 and 8. And the extreme right also, you tend to see the typical other phases also. Lava phase you can see. Lava phase typically intermetallic compounds. This once again to show you, if you try to see through optical microscopy, the extreme left, you can see now depending upon your build directions. You can have a horizontal or vertical. So typically the microstructure will be different if you look at it from the different plane actually. So depending upon the build orientation being horizontal or vertical, you end up with getting different microstructure. So by playing with the process parameter, you end up with getting a microstructure with the desired morphology, and as well as you have various phases in the material. So depending upon the post processing as well as starting processing condition, you will end up in having various phases actually. So you subject your as-built sample to various heat treatment, and heat treatment should be properly controlled with respect to temperature and time in order to ensure you end up in getting the desired phase with the desired morphologies actually. And typically the additively prepared sample, when it comes to corrosion, the detrimental factor for corrosion resistance of Inconel 718, we need to look at that because we are choosing, let us say, powder based. The 3D printed sample, it might have some pores. We are not getting 100% dense part actually. That means you are going to have pores. Now it may be metallurgical pore or mechanical pore. We need to know the typical percentage of pores. And we are getting the non-equilibrium microstructure. We need to look at their morphology, how fine grained they are, whether coarse grain, fine grain. So we need to analyze the typical morphology of the typical microstructure. In fact, in the additive residual stress, you cannot escape. We need to know the typical magnitude of residual stress, how much it is being induced during fabrication. Later on, how much it can be relieved due to post-processing. All these factors, what is listed, it is going to affect your corrosion resistance property of the Inconel 718. And of course, when you do typical selective laser melting, you end up in getting the as-built sample. You can typically see the drag multiple boundaries actually. Because we do laser scanning, the scanning pattern also it matters actually. So that will lead to typical signature like multiple boundaries, surface roughness, and anisotropy, because we are building in several directions, horizontal, vertical, and things like that. Anisotropy also it matters typically for properties. For example, here corrosion section, as well as the post-processing. So as-built sample, you have various features, and post-processing also will influence your mechanical properties as well as the corrosion resistance. So this slide basically to highlight Inconel 718 processed through selective laser melting. We know that Inconel 718 they provide a very good fatigue life. We are trying to highlight typically molten salt. In fact, aircraft when it flies above the ocean or even in the typical marine atmosphere or the high humidity conditions, assuming that you are even with the fuel also we have impurities and sulfur-based impurities. We are trying to simulate actual service condition. This we call hot corrosion. The superalloy, the typical engine, okay, they undergo hot corrosion. Hot corrosion is because of atmosphere having impurities. The impurities are simulated through salt, sodium sulfate, sodium chloride. Origin for the salt could be atmosphere or within the fuel. If you take a fuel, we use aircraft fuel, it also contains trace amount of impurities, metallic impurities. So they also contribute for the formation of this kind of salt actually. Salt deposit over the engine. So we are trying to highlight how the fatigue properties influenced by your salt. I mean the environment, the role of environment. So we have two different types of salt, sodium sulfate and sodium chloride and vanadium pentoxide. Okay, two different types of salt. When there is a salt deposit over the component, and when you do the typical fatigue test, low cyclic fatigue, it is deteriorating of the order of as compared to the normal fatigue because of having the salt atmosphere. It's deteriorating further by 20% actually. So that's where we need to account for combined influence of mechanical load being cyclic, that is called low cyclic fatigue, as well as what kind of atmosphere you're having. In the engine, there is a scope for the salt deposition. The moment you have salt depositions over the component, the salt will aggravate. Okay, it will lead to typical deterioration due to chemical reaction between the material and the environment. So it will deteriorate your fatigue life further actually. So Inconel 718, when they are exposed to atmosphere having impurities, here I talk about hot corrosion because of the salt. The fatigue life is deteriorating further, almost at the order of 20% actually. That means when you try to design, I need to account for good corrosion resistance for your alloy, in addition to ensuring the good fatigue life. And whatever I said in the previous slide, this alloy is printed through additive route, typically by making use of surface melting. For low cyclic fatigue, to understand, we try to make use of typical analytical model called caffeine-Manson relationship. So typically, the low cyclic fatigue material will try to undergo failure due to more of plastic deformation. High cyclic fatigue is more due to elastic strain actually. So high cyclic fatigue and low cyclic fatigue, hope you are already aware. High cyclic fatigue, we talk about number of cycles your components are subjected to cyclic loading. If it is greater than 10/6, we call high cyclic fatigue. If it is less than that, we call low cyclic fatigue. Here we are trying to highlight the Inconel is being used in high temperature application. They are prone for high temperature oxidation, or we call hot corrosion. Hot corrosion is nothing but in presence of molten salt. It is going to deteriorate the fatigue life of your components actually. And next slide here you can see typically for SLM processed material, when you try to do heat treatment, ultimately I need to look at as-built sample, and subsequently when you do heat treatment, every instant you should analyze what is the type of morphology you are going to have for your phases, gamma prime, gamma double prime, lava phases, carbonate phases, and so on. Here, this slide basically to highlight, to study this corrosion is basically called petit corrosion electrochemical technique. That technique we call potential signature in the form of current potential curve. Current versus potential curve. By analyzing current versus potential curve, it is possible to get a corrosion current and corrosion potential. By analyzing corrosion current and corrosion potential, it is possible to do. Typically, the Inconel 718, they are prone for petting or localized attack. The reason being, I am trying to highlight why they should undergo localized attack. Reason being, contributes for providing strength as well as when they are reacting with the environment, they tend to form passive film or protective film. They tend to form, for example, you know, stainless steel, we have in addition to iron, you are having chromium, nickel. What do you call stainless steel? They don't rust. So I will continue. In fact, so far, whatever I highlight, you know, about the typical unique features of additive manufacturing. The Inconel 718 is used extensively for making engine components, typically for gas turbine, Euro engine. And Inconel 718 is made up of nickel-based alloy, wherein nickel is a major alloying element. And you have other alloying elements like chromium, iron, and aluminum, titanium, niobium, a lot of rare earth elements, and so on. And this alloy, as I said, it's prone for pitting attack, whereas most of you might have not done corrosion engineering course. That's where I've tried to highlight once again. In corrosion, basically, we have 8 different forms of corrosion. As a mechanical engineer, we should be aware of what are the corrosion issues. It may be a thermal power plant, nuclear power plant, even biomedical implants, and typically in Euro engine, gas turbine. In addition to knowing typical load, what your components are subjected to, it is equally important to know the role of environment. What it's going to do with the material or the component actually. This Inconel 718, it's prone for pitting attack. Pitting is nothing but localized attack. The pit is nothing but formation of tiny hole. Hope this slide is visible. Figure 319.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please continue, sir.
I want to highlight the typical failure of Inconel 718, typically in the aircraft engine. I mentioned about pitting. I am trying to explain the mechanism for pitting attack. You can see the standard portion is your material. As I said, which material is the prone for undergoing this pitting attack? It is seen in most of the alloys, aluminum alloys, stainless steel, even nickel-based superalloy. I'm just giving one simple answer for it. Any material which it tends to form. So I'm trying to explain pitting mechanism. The protective film or passive film, whatever is formed over the top surface, they undergo selective attack. If you have the aggressive environment like salt here, that's sodium chloride. So chloride will attack selectively at the top surface. Here the white region, semicircle, that typically it's called a tiny hole or pit actually. The moment pit it forms, the typical not tiny pits it will act as anode with respect to the neighboring region. In fact, let me go back to once again the fundamental mechanism for material undergoing corrosion. I should explain this for my talk. You can see this slide is visible. The whole crux of my presentation, I want to highlight the typical material, they are prone for corrosive attack because of formation of galvanic cell. When I say galvanic cell, you can assume to be micro battery. In the micro battery, what do you have? You have anode, cathode, and electrolyte. Likewise, in the microstructure within the material is a heterogeneous microstructure having it may be two-phase. We call dual phase alloy, multi-phase alloy. Typically, you tend to have formation of micro galvanic cell. Micro galvanic cell, it constitutes anode, cathode, and the electrolyte. So there is a formation of several micro galvanic cell within the microstructure. That's how it leads to different forms of corrosion. Starting from uniform attack or pitting attack, we have various forms of corrosion like crevice corrosion, stress corrosion cracking, corrosion fatigue, erosion corrosion. Fundamentally, this slide is very crucial. You need to remember that any form of corrosion, the mechanism is basically governed by the formation of galvanic cell, which constitutes anode, cathode, and electrolyte. The moment they are connected to each other, what is the red line it indicates? The anode will degrade. That's where at the top you can see metal undergoes degradation. The shallow portion, it keeps growing. That's why it's called pit formations, typically in Inconel 7 and 8. So anode, it will undergo degradation, and the neighboring region by acting as cathode, that particular region will act as cathode, it will undergo reduction. I'm going to explain the next pitting corrosion mechanisms. I'm trying to explain within the microstructure, there is formation of several galvanic cell. When I say galvanic cell, we need to account for the whole anode, cathode, and the electrolyte. So the anode, when they degrade, they release electron. The electron will go to the cathode, and cathode, when they undergo reduction could be formation of hydrogen gas depending upon the environment. Suppose if we have aqueous environment, it will lead to formation of let us say hydroxide ion. The local environment pH will change and so on. So I'm trying to highlight metal when they oxidize, they will release electron, and the electron will go for reducing the species in the environment. It could be H+ ion, or it could be oxygen, or it could be any other species present in the environment actually. So the typical corrosion is because of electrochemical reaction between material and the environment. This picture should be clear to you. This is called micro galvanic cell. Typically in the battery, we are exploiting corrosion to produce current. In the material, we want to avoid this corrosion, electrochemical reaction between material and the environment. So likewise here in pitting attack, I am just trying to explain here. My purpose is to explain pitting attack in Inconel. You can see the formation of the shallow region, white region, tiny pits. That tiny pit, small hole, it will act as anode with respect to neighboring region. Anode and neighboring region acting as cathode. At the top, you have the chloride. In fact, we are forming several micro batteries within the material. You are forming several micro batteries or several micro galvanic cells. And having formed metallic chloride, where chloride will attack metal, metal undergoes oxidation. The extreme left, you see, assume that your environment is sodium chloride and you're having moisture. What will happen? If you have dissolved oxygen in the environment, the oxygen will undergo reduction by reacting with the electron coming from the metal. It undergoes reduction, they form hydroxyl ion. And in the pits, in the top region, you can see metal is oxidizing. You have M+, and you assume that the environment contains chloride. The M+ and Cl-, they will form metallic chloride. The metallic chloride, when they hydrolyze, they will tend to form HCl. And HCl is acidic medium. The pH is going to change. I am trying to highlight material having formed pits at a particular location. They tend to grow further. The pit, whatever you have, they will try to grow under the gravity actually. Pit or local tiny hole, they will grow in size actually. In fact, you will tend to see in the component, the formation of the hole, it will try to penetrate deep inside actually. Your component will become pore. The whole pore will try to propagate from the top to the bottom actually. So in the pitting corrosion, it becomes autocatalytic, self-sustaining. Because of the formation of this pit, the tiny hole is acting as anode with respect to neighboring region. We are typically forming a circuit between anode, cathode, and the electrolyte. Having formed circuit, your material will undergo continued degradation. The pit will grow in size. They will become bigger and bigger. Obviously, they will tend to move from the top to the bottom actually. Because of the aggressive environment, chloride environment, your material is getting attacked. And as I said, it happens only for the material forming the passive film actually. Passive film or protective film, they are prone for selective attack. Having formed tiny holes, typically we end up in forming the galvanic cell. I already saw the previous slide. We have typical galvanic cell formation between anode, cathode, and the environment. And you have continuous oxidation material and continuous reduction. Reduction is basically here oxygen present in the environment. They undergo reduction. They tend to form hydroxyl ion. And in the, you can see top portion, the metallic ion. Again, they will form salt with the chloride. The chloride in aqueous environment, they will undergo hydrolysis. It's a continuous generation of H+ ion, HCl environment in the pit actually. Being acidic condition, again the H+ ion also will undergo reduction, so that the metal will undergo continuous oxidation. In fact, the typical slide to show you, you will have continuous oxidation of material and continuous reduction of either H+ ions or oxygen. So the corrosion is basically electrochemical reaction or redox reactions between material and environment. The pitting becomes self-sustaining. That's why I said autocatalytic in nature. The moment you have aggressive environment, the moment it has formed a pit or hole, it will be self-sustaining because of the reactions. As I said, they tend to oxidize. When they oxidize, they release the metal, cation, and the cation, combining with the chloride ion, they form metallic chloride. They will undergo hydrolysis. They tend to form acid. Basically, we are creating a low pH environment. Again, they will deteriorate your material further. Acidic condition is not desirable for your flame. Again, it undergoes attack actually. So pitting attack is a major failure, typically for Inconel 708. And as well as I said, having molten salt over the top surface of the component, it will also affect fatigue life of your material. Again, by forming pit, the moment you know about fatigue life, the moment if you have any pore or high surface temperature is quite high, so they will initiate crack. So fatigue failure is because of crack initiation, propagation, and then finally they will undergo catastrophic failure. So the pitting attack facilitates the crack initiation. Okay, so typically in strength of materials, in design of machine elements, we talk about notch, edge crack. So you can see typical formation of crack due to pitting attack. That's where low cycle fatigue life is influenced by pitting attack in Inconel 708 actually. So how do you prevent this pitting attack? That's where we need to play with, again, the bottom line. I'm repeating time and again. You need to play with the internal morphology of constituents of the microstructure. It is not enough to play with the macro dimension. You need to give more focus for what constituents you have in the microstructure. You need to play the geometrical feature, size and shape of the precipitates. Okay, I want to summarize in Inconel 718, in order to ensure good structural integrity, I need to have good creep resistance, fatigue resistance. Apart from that, good corrosion resistance. For that, I need to have desired morphology of gamma prime, gamma double prime, and lava phase. And we have the carbide phase. All this precipitate phase should be tailored in such a way that they are not detrimental to the structural integrity in terms of the properties as well as for the corrosion resistance actually. And to study corrosion property of materials, we can use, as I said, electrochemical technique. Basically, we use potential dynamic or galvanostate technique, wherein typically we try to use electrochemical cell, where we try to make your material as your working electrode, and with respect to reference electrode, okay, we try to measure typical corrosion current generated from the material when they are exposed to the typical environment. Could be aqueous or it could be even non-aqueous environment. So we can typically measure current density and potential for the material when it is exposed to the environment. The closed environment, we can do the measurement at the lab scale. It is possible to determine at what rate material will corrode actually. So this all to show you, if you do post-processing in terms of heat treatment, and as well as when you do short pinning, what will happen to the microstructure? Time and again, you play with the microstructure. For example, the precipitate, if they are sitting at the grain boundaries, obviously they will strengthen the grain boundary. They will be good for typical strength actually. or even free property and fatigue property. Assuming that, let us say, precipitates are distributed in the matrix, they have needle-like structure. Obviously, they will act as a stress riser. You should never have needle-like structure in the matrix. You are already aware needle-like structure. If you have, it is like having sharp crack. If you have sharp crack, stress will accumulate actually. So the summary is, you prepare the material through additive route. You give appropriate post-processing in terms of heat treatment or short peening. The heat treatment temperature should be known precisely. Temperature and time duration. Ultimately, microstructure will undergo transformation. Time and again, you should always avoid to have a needle-like structure. It's always desirable to have, as far as possible, if you have multi-phase microstructure, it is desirable to have a combination of fine grain structure as well as coarse grain structure. It is not that it should have only fine grains alone. You can have a variety of morphology having combined fine grain structure as well as coarse grain structure. But you should never have the needle-like structure in the microstructure. A needle-like structure will act as a stress riser that is not desirable for the mechanical properties as well as for corrosion resistance properties actually. So all this slide to highlight Inconel 708 produced through additive route and then by giving several heat treatment as well as short peening treatment. So we can optimize the heat treatment. For which heat treatment your material will have desired microstructural morphology to ensure good mechanical properties as well as corrosion resistance. In fact, I just want to, do I have time? Can I take 3 minutes more?
Yes, sir, please, sir.
Yeah. In fact, in our lab, we just fabricated a 718 vertically built, horizontally built Inconel 718, self laser melted Inconel 718. They are subject to post heat treatment as well as short peening. So what I want to highlight, by giving proper heat treatment, short peening, we improved corrosion resistance for this particular alloy for the as-built sample almost of the order of 15% actually. By giving proper heat treatment and short peening, ultimately the role of this heat treatment short peening, again I am ensuring getting the desired morphology of the microstructure. Having ensured that, we could get ultimately the improvement of the order of 20% for the as-built 708 sample actually. Again, to measure the corrosion rate, we used electrochemical technique. The electrochemical technique, as I said, typically we need to set up a cell. I mean, having a cell having anode, cathode, and electrolyte, and we have reference electrode, working electrode, and then we have a counter electrode. I mean, the typical setup I have not put in the slide. I am trying to highlight how to measure the corrosion rate by using this electrochemical technique. Basically, we try to track current versus potential curve for your sample actually. You can see in this slide potential versus current density. So typically we get this kind of signature. So you can see the SPM lab, typically we can get corrosion current and corrosion potential. By analyzing corrosion current, corrosion potential, it is possible to arrive at what rate your metal is degrading in a given corrosive environment or aggressive environment actually. So we have done typically for post-process sample with respect to heat treatment and short peening, and we could see very good improvement in corrosion resistance property, typically for heat treated sample followed by short peening. They combined heat treatment and short peening to improve the corrosion resistance much better than doing heat treatment alone actually. So we are comparing between as-built sample, heat treated sample, and then heat treated followed by short peening. Heat treated followed by short peening, it improved the corrosion resistance of the order of almost 20% actually. Yeah. So we can make use of electrochemical impedance spectroscopy to analyze protective nature of the film which has formed over the surface of the material. That technique is called electrochemical impedance spectroscopy. We can analyze the protective nature of the film. The film could be porous or non-porous. I'm giving the example of rusting of iron. Iron, when it rusts, it forms a rust. The rust is not acting as a protective film. For example, if you take aluminium, aluminium also prone for forming passive film, protective film. But the film is continuous, it's covering the whole surface, they are non-porous in nature. So by analyzing impedance or resistance of the protective film which has formed surface the material, it is possible to determine the corrosion rate of the material. This is called impedance spectroscopy. We try to characterize impedance is nothing but frequency dependent resistance of the protective film. I am just analyzing conducting property of the film which has formed over the surface of the material. In other words, we are trying to track continuously the impedance of the passive film which has formed over the material. If it is porous or non-porous, we can try to get the impedance or resistance. Through that, you can try to see whether a film could act as protective film to prevent the further loss of material. Okay, so this is called electrochemical impedance spectroscopy. In fact, this I will not go more in detail. How do you analyze or how do you fit your electrochemical measurement data into equivalent electrical circuit? I will not go in detail. Simply by measuring the impedance of the film, we can judge, for example, the table at the bottom most heat rated followed by short paining. We can say impedance of the film is of the order of 682. What does it mean if the impedance is quite high for the passive film? The passive film is acting as a barrier between your material and the environment. As I said, corrosion is basically generates current. When you have very high resistance of the film, this slide I want to conclude. So ultimately, if you want to ensure good mechanical properties as well as corrosion resistance for typically for any material, here I'm trying to highlight for Inconel 709. All the time I highlighted about microstructure. Starting from the process to the end, when it comes to 3D printing during processing, I need to ensure right from the beginning. I mean the typical powder what you're choosing, powder characteristics, what the typical powder size distribution, their composition purity, the typical powder size distribution, their purity, they're quite critical. You should always go for choosing narrow size distribution of the powder when you want to do 3D printing. In terms of powder characteristics, starting material, and during processing, what are the parameters right from laser power, scanning rate, the beam diameter, layer thickness, what you are choosing for the powder, and the build orientation. So all these process parameter, powder characteristics, and microstructure, all they are going to dictate not only corrosion resistance as well as mechanical property of the material you are going to print. At the bottom, when it comes to physical features, we talk about surface roughness. Typically in 3D printed sample, we have surface roughness, staircase effect, unmelted powder, and the typical geometry also. Because you are preparing STL file, right from the beginning, you have to take a typical part geometry, what you want to print. The intricate shapes, if you want to print it, I need to give clear focus when you try to make a geometry for your component actually. That's where it comes talking about tessellation, slicing. This we call topology optimization. What kind of structure you want to print? Is it possible to print through such a complicated geometry which is coming from your STL file? That's where all these features are important. Surface profile, and then post processing, you have to play with the heat treatment or the short peening. Okay, and even it may require some sort of material removal through milling and machining and so on. So post processing also will influence your typical microstructure. Microstructure in turn will influence your properties actually. And as well as when it comes to corrosion resistance, we need to know about the typical oxidation tendency of the material, microstructural stability, and when it forms passive flame or protective flame, we need to see whether they are protective flame or non-protective flame. Okay, obviously, when you want to provide good protectivity for the material, you should also choose a proper alloying elements actually. So that's where it comes under typical material microstructure, which is required for ensuring good corrosion resistance actually. So finally, to conclude, 3D printing when you choose typically for superalloy, I want to highlight typical buy to flare ratio is quite low. It means that material wastage we are minimizing almost up to the order of more than 50 to 60%. We are overcoming the material wastage actually as compared to conventional route. There are a lot of materials getting wasted if you want to print a complicated geometry of the part, typically which is going into the engine actually, engine component, compressor disc actually. So material loss is quite low if you choose circular melting or EV melting. Apart from that, to conclude, having built the sample, having chosen the appropriate powder, having chosen the appropriate process parameter, as built sample, it requires post-processing, it requires heat treatment, as well as hot peening depending on the component you want to produce, ultimately to decide the microstructure. To conclude, you have to give focus for the processing, focus for the kind of microstructure you are going to get, focus for the properties actually. I mean, the processing, microstructure, and properties, they are all related. As a mechanical engineer, I should give, as a design engineer, I should give more focus on material properties, more specifically on microstructure. When you do stress analysis, you should not look at it from continuum perspective alone. We need to give focus for internal microstructure. When you try to do stress analysis, the critical region, we need to look at what kind of microstructure you are having. Ultimately, I should ensure with processing followed by post-processing, I need to have design microstructure, and why the materials are failing when you use it for longer period of time. As you know, stress is accumulating when you use it for longer period of time. What happens to the material when you use it for longer time? Obviously, the microstructure is no more stable. They undergo transformation. Fundamentally, what dictates this microstructure transformation? Fundamentally, it's transformed through, atomically speaking, they all undergo migration of atom. It's called diffusion of atom. They undergo diffusion at the high temperature, even when they are subject to loading. When you use it for longer period of time, the internal microstructure undergo transformation. It is no more columnar structure, equiaxial structure, or cell-like structure. They all undergo transformation. Fundamentally, it's all due to microscopic diffusion of atom. It is nothing but diffusion. Now, mass transfer. As a mechanical, we know about mass transfer. It is a microscopic mass transfer of atom when they are subjected to repeated loading. It may be static load or dynamic load. Even when they react with the environment, we know that, in fact, in Cornell, we have seen they tend to form pit, actually. Pit further aggravates the typical formation and propagation of the crack, typically when it comes to fatigue life, actually. Time and again, you need to look at typical microstructure. As a mechanical person, you always look at it in terms of geometrical perspective. Typically, you need to control their size and shape of the constants of the microstructure. In addition to that, you should have the appropriate alloying element composition in the material, actually. So component, so the materials are the one which is becoming component by providing appropriate shape to it, actually. So they are inseparable, actually. Microstructure and component, they are inseparable, actually. So even by using FEM, it is possible to include a microstructural effect, actually. So when you do any forming operation, rolling, forging, extrusion, even in the conventional processing, your material is not taking homogeneous deformation, actually. They always undergo inhomogeneous deformation because microstructure is no more continuum. It is very heterogeneous microstructure, actually. As a design person, I should have the feel for microstructure. I should have the feel for material. Design consideration alone is not sufficient, actually. Design plus material, the internal microstructure, actually. That is going to decide how long the material or component is going to sustain in the actual service condition. So with that, let me just conclude, and I thank you all for the all participants as well as for the organizer for having given this opportunity to present my talk, actually. So if you have any questions, I'm ready to take.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your nice presentation on the technical aspect of this corrosion field. I think many of our participants. Okay. Sir, there is one question from one of my colleague, Dr.
A couple of questions I would like to hear from the audience. I don't know whether they're able to capture.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Sir, I have one question, sir.
Jaykumar.
Sir, I wanted to do stress corrosion.
Yeah, I'm able to hear.
The titanium alloy, titanium 6% of aluminum, 4% of vanadium alloy. Titanium 6% of aluminum, 4% of vanadium alloy. Do you have the SSRT testing machine, sir? Slow strain rate testing machine. We wanted to do with a different environment.
Yeah,
like,
we have.
acid medium and alkaline medium. Do you have the SSRT machine, sir?
We can use UTM. We can do slow strain rate. Slow strain rate machine.
Slow strain
it is available in metallurgy department. I am in design department.
Yes, sir. Yes,
we can do normal fatigue and other testing, and SSC can be done in metallurgy department.
Particularly, I wanted to do this slow strain rate testing machine only. I'm required.
It can be done. It can be done. It can be. Yeah, it can be done.
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir.
In fact, I am in the process of procuring UTM for doing corrosion fatigue as well as SSC also.
Yes, sir.
I am in the process of getting this machine.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So what I want to convey as a mechanical engineer, we should have equal importance for corrosion issue also.
Yes, sir.
It is not sufficient to look at it from only for mechanical loading alone.
Yes, sir.
Take it oil and gas industries and all the nuclear power plant, thermal power plant, biomedical implants, even for the engine components. You cannot escape addressing the corrosion issues, actually.
Yes, sir. So we wanted to do with a different environment, sir. The flight is flying in the normal environment as well as in the acid medium and alkaline medium. So
that's where I talked about
the particular alloy, sir. The titanium alloy is very peculiar material. That's why I wanted to do.
Yeah. So in fact, I am in the process of procuring the agreement, and you are most welcome. Maybe after 3-4 months, actually.
So thank you, sir.
And right now, if you want to do it quickly, you can. If you want to do it quickly, you can go to Sekiri Karakudi, Central Electronic Research Institute. There they have the full setup.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You can do STC, corrosion fatigue, everything.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
Plus,
sir.
NML Jamshedpur also they have. NML Jamshedpur also.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
National Medical Laboratory is their lab. Thank you. Thank you. See, any other question, please? Any more question, please? I hope you are able to follow my talk. I highlighted about the importance of microstructure. But right now, only for selected material, additive manufacturing is established. Each material powder is being unique. You have to establish process parameter. You may talk about design for additive, design for fatigue. No. Ultimately, we need to come to material, and with respect to each material, we have to standardize your process actually. Right now, it's only known for selected powders actually.
Yes, sir. There is no questions from
participants. Yes, Jai Kumar. Thank you, Jai Kumar. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Myself, Dr. R.O.K. Julius, sir, another coordinator. Dr. Jai Kumar sir is also there. Yes, sir. Okay.
Jai Kumar. Jai Kumar, R.O.K. and your good name?
Yeah, myself is Dr. R.O.K. Julius, sir.
Okay. Thank you, R.O.K. so much.
Okay, right, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. On behalf of the Department of Mechanical Engineering of B.S. Abdur Rahman Crescent Institute of Science and Technology, I take this opportunity to thank you, sir, spending your valuable time and giving your insights and a very good presentation on the research aspects of this field. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So much. Thank you so much, Jai Kumar, R.O.K.
Yes, sir. See you, sir.
Bye-bye. Even thank you all the participants. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. And if you have any queries, you are most welcome to send email.